Y'all, the Star Wars franchise just handed us the clearest proof yet that Hollywood ain't learned a single dadgum thing. And the receipts are so ugly they'd make a buzzard turn away. 1 year ago, Disney was out here telling us that Amandla Stenberg was the future of Star Wars, the face of a $230 million show, a brand new era, a bold new direction. And right now, today, in March of 2026, that future is nowhere to be found. No franchise, no series, no major studio film on the calendar for this year. Just the quiet, unmistakable sound of a Hollywood career that went sideways faster than a tumbleweed in a West Texas tornado. Let me lay it all out for you, plain as a stretch of empty highway between Odessa and nowhere. Because this story is bigger than one actress and one show. This is about what happens when you put politics ahead of storytelling, and then have the nerve to blame the audience when it all falls apart like a wet paper bag in a July rainstorm. Now, The Acolyte cost Disney $230 million, $230 million. Let that number just sit there for a second and marinate like a good brisket. That is more money than most small countries have seen in a calendar year. And Disney lit every last dollar of it on fire. The show premiered in June of 2024, and within 3 weeks it had vanished clean off the Nielsen streaming charts. Not slipped down a few spots, vanished, gone, done. Third week in, and it could not crack the top 10 on the very platform it was made for. You want to know what the audience actually thought of it? On Rotten Tomatoes, the audience score sat at 14%. 14. The IMDb rating landed at 4.1 out of 10, with nearly half of all the reviews being 1 star straight across the board. And that ain't review bombing, partner. That is just people telling you the honest truth in the only language the internet has available. Because when nearly half your audience shows up, sits down, watches your show, and gives it the lowest possible rating, something went real wrong with the show. And it weren't the audience's fault it went wrong. Now compare that to what came before it. The Mandalorian's finale pulled over 1 billion minutes watched. Obi-Wan Kenobi managed nearly 2.5 billion. The Acolyte's finale limped across the finish line at 335 million minutes watched. That is a 66% drop compared to The Mandalorian. 66% of the Star Wars audience looked at what Disney cooked up and said, "No thank you. I got better things to do with my evening." And what did Amandla Stenberg do when all this was becoming obvious and the cancellation was coming down the pike like a freight train with no brakes? She went on Instagram and told the world the show was killed by hyper-conservative bigotry and vitriol. Said it was the alt-right that did it. Said she had been bracing for the cancellation from the moment she got the job because she knew the hatred was coming. Now let me ask you something real simple that the media don't want to ask. If the show truly was bringing in Disney's highest premiere numbers for 2024, as some outlets reported, and if the critic reviews were strong, and if the hatred was coming from just a fringe group of bad actors online, how in the Sam Hill does a show go from its opening week to being invisible on the charts in 3 weeks flat? See, real audiences don't review bomb with their viewing habits. You can post all the negative reviews you want online, and people will still watch a show if they are genuinely curious about it. What happened with The Acolyte is that curious people showed up for the first couple of episodes and then made a personal decision with their remote control that they had seen enough. And that ain't bigotry. That is just a free market of human attention working exactly the way it always has. Here is the part that ought to really get your boots muddy. While Stenberg was chalking the whole thing up to alt-right attacks, the data tells a story that don't need any political framing at all. The show cost nearly double what Ahsoka cost, and Ahsoka, which was itself considered a disappointment, pulled nearly double The Acolyte's viewership numbers. So you spent twice as much money to attract half as many people, and that right there is a math problem, not a racism problem. A $230 million show that cannot match the audience numbers of a cheaper show that was itself underperforming is not a victim of anything, except bad decisions made by people who convinced themselves that message was more important than story. Now let's talk about where things stand today, because this is the part that ought to make you sit up straight. As of right now, Amandla Stenberg does not have a single major film releasing in 2026. Zero. The franchise door at Disney is shut. The Star Wars door is obviously locked and bolted from the inside. What she has is a role in Children of Blood and Bone, a fantasy film over at Paramount that ain't due out until January of 2027. And a smaller animated project called Wildwood that has been circling release for a while now. And that is the pipeline for someone who was supposed to be the face of the most storied franchise in entertainment history. Now compare that to where she was in 2022. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies came out. And let me be real here. That was a genuinely solid little horror comedy. Critics liked it. Audiences found it. It had legs. And at that moment, Stenberg looked like someone who was building real momentum. Someone who understood how to pick smart projects and deliver in them. Then The Acolyte came along, and it was supposed to be the big leap, the franchise role, the thing that takes you from indie darling with buzz to household name. And instead it became a $230 million cautionary tale about what happens when a production spends more time cultivating a political identity than it does crafting a story worth telling. And see, that is the real shame of it. Nobody had to turn The Acolyte into a culture war. That choice was made deliberately and repeatedly. The show was announced with a specific identity baked into its marketing. The cast and crew made public statements before a single frame aired that were designed to signal what kind of story this was going to be. And when you do that, when you walk out before the game even starts and tell half the audience that this ain't for them, you ain't being bold. You are just being bad at business. Because Star Wars, at its best, the stuff that actually moved mountains, was for everybody. It was for farm kids in Iowa and ranchers in Texas and little girls who wanted to see the galaxy and little boys who wanted to pick up a lightsaber. And the moment you start narrowing that tent down to who is politically welcome, you lose the magic and you lose the audience. And then you get to stand there on Instagram wondering where everybody went. Let me tell y'all something about how this playbook works, because we have seen it run so many times now, it has basically become a formula. Step 1, cast your show with an identity politics first approach and make sure everybody knows it before the premiere. Step 2, dare the audience to object so you can frame any criticism as evidence of hatred rather than actual feedback about the product. Step 3, watch the numbers crater while the critics who are ideologically aligned with the production write glowing reviews. Step 4, blame the audience when the streaming charts tell the truth the critics would not. And Step 5, walk away calling yourself brave while the studio quietly cancels the whole thing and pretends it never happened. And that formula is so worn out by now, it ought to have its own Wikipedia page. We saw it with The Acolyte. We saw it with a whole roster of other projects that cost studios a combined fortune while regular people just quietly stayed home and watched something they actually enjoyed. And every single time the people behind these projects refused to consider even for 1 second that the audience might be right, that maybe the show was not actually that good, that maybe people can smell the difference between a story being told because someone genuinely loves it and a story being told to prove a point. Now, I want to say something here, and I want to say it carefully because it matters. This ain't about Amandla Stenberg as a human being. Ain't about whether she is a good person or a bad person. None of that is the point. The point is that she got handed the lead role of a $230 million franchise show, and that show crater bombed. And instead of taking even a small portion of accountability for what went wrong creatively or strategically, the entire narrative became about the audience being the villain. And that approach don't serve her career, it don't serve the audience, and it sure as shootin' don't serve the franchise. Because here's the thing about audiences. They are not a problem to be overcome. They are not a demographic to be educated or corrected. They are the entire reason any of this stuff exists. Without them, there is no franchise. Without them, there is no $230 million budget. Without them, there is no career. And when you repeatedly tell them that their honest response to your product is actually just evidence of their moral failings, they do not repent and buy a ticket. They just walk away. And right now, a whole lot of people have walked away from Star Wars because according to the data, nearly 75% of the audience that showed up for The Mandalorian did not show up for The Acolyte. Nearly 3/4 of the fan base decided this particular version of the galaxy far, far away was not worth their evening. And that is not a boycott organized by the alt-right. That is just human beings making free choices with their time, which is the only real vote any audience ever gets to cast. 1 year later, the show is canceled. The career trajectory has stalled out, and the franchise is in the middle of a full reset, while Lucasfilm figures out how to win back the audience it spent several years alienating. Children of Blood and Bone does not come out until 2027. Wildwood is a smaller project. The major studio pipeline is empty for 2026, and somewhere in all of that quiet, there is a lesson that keeps getting ignored at enormous cost, because the audience ain't your enemy. The audience ain't bigoted for not watching your show. The audience is just a whole lot of regular folks who grew up loving Star Wars and wanted something worth loving in return. And give them that, and they show up every single time. They showed up for The Mandalorian. They would show up for the next thing too if the next thing respects them enough to put the story first. And out here in Texas, we got a saying, a well you fill with poison ain't a well nobody's gonna drink from. Disney spent a few years poisoning the Star Wars well with shows that treated their audience like the problem. And right now, everybody is real thirsty and real tired of being blamed for it. And 1 year later, the numbers say it all. And y'all, the numbers don't lie.